What's up guys, hope you're having a good day. In this video we're going to be taking a deep dive into each of the main card fights taking place this weekend at UFC 301. This weekend's card is another really good event, and I know it doesn't have any of the big names or high profile matchups as some of the recent pay-per-view cards that we've had, but there's actually some really solid matchmaking on this event, and just like last weekend's card, I think we're going to get some pretty good fights. The main event in particular between Alexandre Pantoja and Steve Erceg, I think is a really good fight. I don't think people are giving Erceg the credit that he deserves in this matchup. I'm very tempted to bet him, and when we get into breaking that fight down, we're going to go into a lot of depth on the reasons why I think Erceg has a great chance of winning this weekend, and we'll also, as ever, be showing you some video footage to back up the reasons why I feel Pantoja could really struggle to defend his title. Now, I haven't made my mind up on this fight yet, so I'm going to ask for you guys to help me out a bit in the comment section. Let me know what you think. If you are going to leave a comment though, and let me know what you think, please watch the whole breakdown instead of just kind of jump into the comment section. Let me know how you feel, because I feel a lot of people are being quite dismissive of Erceg this week because he hasn't really fought anyone. As opposed to, looking at how he matches up skill for skill with Pantoja in this fight. But anyway, before we get into that, just want to let you guys know that my bread and butter is live betting on the UFC. It's my speciality, it's what I do best. You can see on the website at the moment we got this header: we make a profit on 70% of UFC events. When we had the week's break in the UFC schedule last week, I actually went through my database and past results to see what my overall win rate was, and dating back to 2016 when I started recording results, I've actually made a profit on around 70% of events. The exact percentage is 69.78%, so rounded up to 70%. We've made a profit on 224 events and made a loss on 97, so I'm really proud of this. It's my life's work. Hopefully we'll be going until at least 2026, hopefully over a 10-year period. I can say I maintained a 70% win rate on UFC events in UFC live betting over a very long period of time. So if you do watch every UFC event live, give my live betting service a try. I think you'll like it a lot. If you don't, no problem, get in touch. I'm very accessible through emails, through my Discord channel. I'll get you a refund, no problem. Link in the description below if you want to check out my live betting service. Like I say, we make a profit on 70% of UFC events. You can see a nice, steady, consistent uptrend over a very long period of time. And I think we're just going to continue to trend up pretty much until the end of time. Of course, we'll have dips along the way. Here, dips. We actually had a dip towards the end of last year, but we're coming out of it now, and it's probably a great time to jump on board. Alright, so before we get into breaking down these fights, I want to talk about home advantage. Just because whenever we have an event in a country like Brazil, home advantage is a big factor to take into consideration. And rather than me repeating myself, going over what home advantage means to each of these fights, I could just cover it in some detail here, and then you can apply it to every single matchup on this card where we've got a Brazilian fighter facing an opponent who is not from Brazil. So we know this event is taking place in Brazil, and the arena's pretty big arena. You can see a picture of it here where the UFC have previously held an event there. So it's a big card, big arena. Like I say, this may not have the biggest names on the card, might not have the highest profile matchups, but you've still got fan favourites like Jose Aldo. Alexandre Pantoja is going to be very popular with the Brazilian fans, and I would imagine that the atmosphere is going to be pretty crazy on Saturday night, which is going to have an influence on the fights for sure. We know home advantage is a thing. We know that Brazilians beat non-Brazilians around 65% of the time when they fight on cards in Brazil, and while some of that statistic will be down to, favourable matchup, where the UFC are trying to give fighters like Caio Borralho or Yasmin Lacindu, relatively favourable matchups so that they can get wins and please, the Brazilian fans who are paying a lot of money for tickets. We also can't ignore the fact that home advantage is a big deal for lots of different reasons. So the first reason why it is a pretty big deal is because obviously fighters that are from Brazil, they're going to be more used to the climate, the time zone. They will probably have fought in Brazil before when they were on their come up on the regional circuit. Whereas if you're from the United States or Australia, like Steve Erceg, perhaps you don't have any experience fighting in South America, you haven't got any experience fighting in that climate or that time zone. And so that's new. That could throw you off during fight week and for your fights. That's the first reason why, Brazilians facing non-Brazilians on a card like this have just a little bit of an advantage. Another reason why they've got advantage is they've obviously got the crowd behind them. Now, home advantage is a big deal in any sport, and the UFC is no different. And the way that I always describe why home advantage is such a big deal is if you think about when you are working out, right? Say you're running on the treadmill or you're going out for a 10K run. Say you are running by yourself. When you start to get really tired, when your lungs start to hurt, when you're struggling to breathe because it's really difficult to run, 10 kilometers. If you're just by yourself, it's very tempting to stop and take a break or stop and walk for a bit. It's very easy to just, start to take it easy and not push yourself because you're not accountable to anyone. You haven't got anyone pushing you or driving you. Whereas if you have a personal trainer or someone that you're running with or someone to support you, to cheer you on, you're way less likely to stop running. You're way less likely to quit when you get tired. You're more likely to dig deep, push through the tiredness and keep going, just because that support of a friend or a personal trainer or a running buddy, it just pushes you to keep going. And when it comes to UFC events, the crowd, when they get behind the home nation fighters, can have the same impact. So, when guys like Alexandre Pantoja or Jose Aldo or Michel Pereira or Caio Borralho, when they start to get tired or start to get hurt, whereas they may start to, fade a little bit if they were fighting on neutral territory or maybe in the Apex Center, having those, 10, 15,000 Brazilian fans behind them, cheering their names, supporting them, driving them, pushing them on, celebrating every time they have any little bit of success in the fight, that just makes it easier for them to dig deep when things get tough, when they're tired, when they're hurt, and just keep pushing, keep going, and just basically elevate their level of performance. So it's one of the reasons, or one more of the reasons, why home advantage is a big deal. It's also a big deal because while, Brazilian fighters will get a lift from the crowd and they'll feed off the energy of the crowd and it will give them more confidence and the ability to dig deep during tough times, the atmosphere that the home fans create can also lead to non-Brazilians underperforming because it has the opposite effect, right? You imagine, if you're Jonathan Martinez this weekend and you're fighting, a fan favorite like Jose Aldo, who's going to have the crowd behind him in a big way, going to get the Uva Moer chants and all that kind of stuff. We know that anytime Aldo lands a big shot in this fight, the crowd are going to go absolutely crazy, which not only is going to give Aldo a lift and a boost in confidence, but it's going to, knock the confidence of Martinez a bit and potentially throw him off his game. Whereas if Martinez lands a big shot, it's going to be a bit of a nothing burger for the crowd. They're not really going to care. And we also know that if a fighter like Anthony Smith or Ihor Potieria or Paul Craig or anyone else on this card who's not from Brazil gets put in a bad position, the crowd are going to be going crazy, chanting Uva Moer, and I think that can make fighters doubt themselves. It could also make fighters, more likely to quit when put in bad positions. On top of that, it also increases the possibility of an adrenaline dump, right? And of course this could apply to Brazilian fighters too. But if we consider, you're a guy like Steve Erceg or perhaps Jack Shaw or say, William Gomez, fighters who are relatively inexperienced when it comes to competing on cards of this scale in arenas such as this. You know, having the crowd create a crazy atmosphere and getting dragged into a war against this crazy Brazilian that's trying to punch your head off your shoulders, I mean, that could definitely lead to adrenaline dumps. And then the final way in which home advantage can be a big deal on this card is obviously judging bias. Now, you know, whether or not judges are actually biased towards Brazilian fighters is up for debate. Over the years, we've obviously seen a lot of cards. You know, I've been betting on the UFC for almost 20 years now, pretty seriously for 15 years. And, you know, over that time, I could definitely say that more often than not, if you get a Brazilian fighting a non-Brazilian and it's a relatively close competitive fight, any rounds that are kind of subjective how you score them, or any rounds that are relatively close, you know, the Brazilian judges will tend to score those rounds in favour of the Brazilian fighter. Now, this could be because they're biased, but another explanation would be that, you know, at the end of the day, we're all human and we are influenced by other people, right? We can't help it. And if you've been to a UFC event, you'll know that when you're watching the action live, it's not always easy to gauge who's winning the round, right? It's not always easy to work out how rounds are being scored. So if you're a judge that has maybe lost a bit of concentration during the round, or you're not really sure who's winning the round or who has won the round, but, you know, the crowd are going crazy and celebrating anytime Michel Pereira does anything remotely successful, then if, you know, this fight did turn out to be competitive, the judges are more likely to lean towards scoring it for Pereira because perhaps you perceived Pereira to be doing better than he actually was because the crowd were behind him and celebrating anytime he had a little bit of success, whereas Potieria didn't get that love from the crowd, and that could influence a judge. So the way that I approach betting cards like this, and this is going to be something I'm going to talk about a lot throughout my breakdown videos for these fights this week. In order for me to bet on a non-Brazilian fighter to beat a Brazilian, I need to see something really, 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 really special, because I know it won't be easy, you know, if these fights go to a decision for Brazilians to get their hands for non-Brazilians to get their hands raised. And that's why, you know, this week we've got a few fights which are tricky for me, because on neutral territory I think I'd be all over the non-Brazilians. And some examples of this: Steve Erceg, Jonathan Martinez, and Kevin Borralho, I all think, you know, on neutral territory would stand a much greater chance of winning this weekend than they do facing Brazilians in Brazil. But anyway, let me know what you think in the comments below. Am I exaggerating home advantage? How do you feel about the statistic that we've got in a book like Fightnomics, which states that Brazilians win 65% of the time against non-Brazilians when they fight in Brazil? What do you think about that statistic? Do you put much weight on it? Does it affect your betting decisions for this card? Let me know in the comments below. Alright, so now let's get into breaking down the main event of this card, which is going to be Alexandre Pantoja versus Steve Erceg. But before I do that, I've got something very important that I want to talk to you about. Now, I won't take up too much of your time, because I know many of you watching this won't care about football, or as you may call it in your country, soccer. But a few years ago, I started working really hard to become profitable betting on a high liquidity sport. And I chose football because, well, I've been watching it since I was just a young boy. You can see pictures of me playing football here, even since before I could barely walk. And it's just been a passion of mine my whole life. I absolutely love it. And it also helps that football is the highest liquidity sport in the world. It's got higher max bet limits than any other sport in the world. It's a global sport, which means there's hundreds of games that take place every week for us to cherry pick super strong positions from. And because it's such a high liquidity sport with really high max bet limits, you could also place bets on betting exchanges and brokerages, which won't shut you down for placing bets with them. If you've been watching my channel for a long time, you'll know that occasionally I put out a video showing one of my betting accounts being closed. due to consistently making profit on it. And, you know, even though this is a nuanced topic, this is something that 99% of betting sites do. And over the years, I've had hundreds of betting accounts closed, which is a huge problem, which is what pushed me into becoming profitable on football. So over the last few years, I've been working really hard at becoming profitable on football. And this season, all the hard work really paid off, because as you can see, the season started in August and we've made a profit every single month this season apart from November. Now, today is the 2nd of May. This is the final month of the season, and generally speaking, May is the best month of the year for betting on football. This is because May is the business end of the season. So if you like basketball, you know, if you like the NFL, May is the month where you get your playoff finals, you know, your Super Bowls, your championships, your tournament finals, really high stakes games, which tend to be really good for betting. And historically, over the last 2 years, I've performed really well in May. So I'm confident I'm going to perform well in this May as well. So if you want to give my football betting service a try, all my bets are live bets. And the way it works is, if you come to my website and sign up, as you go through checkout, you will be given a link to download a text file, which includes a link to a Telegram channel. So this was April's football betting group. We made 3.8 units overall. And basically what happens is I will post a bet like this, and you know, some clips of goals being scored and all that kind of stuff. And it's basically how it works. You join, you tail the bets, hopefully you make money. If you've been with me this season, you've done very, very, very well. So that's just how it works. You get the bets on Telegram, and like I say, May is the best month of the year for betting football. There's no guarantees. I don't know how I'm going to do this month, but like I said, I've done well in May in the past. Very confident I'm going to do well this May. Very confident in my ability to make money most months betting football. So most of you watching this are probably watching this because you like betting sports. You want to make money from betting sports. I'm making a very, 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 very good living right now from betting on football. I'm earning more from betting on football these days than I ever have betting on the UFC. And so, might want to check it out. If you're watching on YouTube, I'll leave a link in the description below. If you're a member of my community watching this on my website, obviously you just come to my website, hit football betting, there you go. If you do bet with me for a month and you hate it, you regret it, you wish you never signed up, it's no problem. Get in touch, email me, send me a message on Discord. It's not a problem. Get you refunded. But give it a try. I think you're going to like it a lot. I think May is going to be a very good month. And if you are considering trying football, all I would say is do it in May, because when May finishes, we go into June and July, which is the off season. And even though I will be betting football in June and July, because football's not like the NFL, where during the off season there's nothing really to bet on. Football's a global sport, so there's football to bet all year round. But some leagues are easier to make money on than others, and the leagues that we have running throughout June and July, the off season, are really hard to make money on. So May is a really, really good month for betting. June and July are going to be very hard. So if you are thinking of trying out football betting, don't wait until June and July. Do it now, or wait until August when the new season starts. That would be my recommendation to you. All right, now let's get into breaking down this main event between Alexandre Pantoja and Steve Erceg. Before we talk about how these two match up stylistically, gotta be honest, I haven't made my mind up on whether I'm betting this fight yet. I heavily lean towards Steve Erceg for the reasons that I'll be talking about in this breakdown, and also the video footage of Pantoja that I'll be showing you. Heavily lean towards Erceg, but it is by no means a super strong position for you to put your money. It's definitely risky for the reasons that I will go through. And yeah, let me know if you watch on YouTube what you think in the comments below. Let me know what you think on Discord. Like I say, if you are going to let me know what you think, please watch the whole breakdown first. Don't just jump in and say you're a fool, Pantoja's going to win easily, when you haven't actually looked at how they match up from a stylistic point of view. Spend some time researching this one for yourself and let me know what you think, because I don't feel Erceg is getting enough credit in this fight. I think this is a fantastic matchup. So, if we start off by taking a look at the odds, we can see that Pantoja is the favourite at average odds of around 1.50, which is going to be minus 200 for an implied probability of 67%. If we take a look at the odds on Erceg, he is around an average of 2.65, which is going to be plus 165 for an implied probability of 38%. So Pantoja is 34 years old, 5'5", with a 68-inch reach. Erceg, 28 years old, 5'8", with a 68.5-inch reach. So, a couple of X factors for us to talk about on this one. The first being Pantoja's age. So at 34 years old, he is quite old for a flyweight. He's also had a lot of fights. He's had 33 pro fights, and that means he's got a lot of miles on the clock. The thing with Pantoja on top of this is we all love Pantoja because he's tough, he's scrappy, he's game, and he always puts on exciting fights. But how often have we seen Pantoja in these knockdown, drag-out wars where he stands right in front of his opponent, goes toe-to-toe, and just takes tons of damage as a result? Pantoja is a guy that in his 33 pro fights has taken a lot of damage, and he's starting to get up there in age. So I do feel, it's great that Pantoja's won the belt, but at this stage in his career, I would expect him to be declining from fight to fight. Erceg, on the other hand, he's only had 13 pro fights. He's only 28 years old. He should be making big improvements from fight to fight. He's not even in his prime yet. And with him being 6 years younger than Pantoja, statistically, that gives him around about 65% chance of winning if you were to just blind bet that statistic over the long term. Now, both guys have got roughly the same reach, but you can see that Erceg is quite a bit taller, 5'8" versus 5'5". Now, what I've noticed in some of the press shots of these two doing promotional work in the lead up to this fight is that Erceg looks quite a lot bigger than Pantoja. I can't be totally sure there's a big size difference here because we don't know what footwear both guys are wearing. But this is definitely one of those matchups that I'm interested to look at the ceremonial weigh-ins for, because I do think there's a good chance Erceg has a decent size advantage over Pantoja here, but we're not going to get confirmation of that until the ceremonial weigh-ins on Friday. But that's definitely something to think about. So those are some X factors that I think are important to bear in mind. Of course, the other X factor, and a pretty big X factor, is that Alexandre Pantoja has got home advantage on his side for this fight, and we know that Brazilian fighters win around 65% of the time when they fight non-Brazilians in Brazil. And of course, there's a separate video that you can watch on my website going into all the details, all the information on why home advantage is a big factor on this card. And this at the beginning of this YouTube video if you're watching the video on YouTube. So home advantage a big deal in a matchup like this. So, where do we begin? How do these two match up from a stylistic point of view? So, a lot of people hate this fight. A lot of people don't think Steve Erceg should be getting a title shot so soon. A lot of people think this main event sucks. So, I understand the reasons why people are annoyed that Erceg has got a title shot, right? Because he hasn't beaten anyone in the top 10. I don't think Schnell's ranked in the top 10. If he is, he shouldn't be. But outside of Schnell, he hasn't beaten anyone near the top 10. He's only had 3 fights in the UFC. He's very unproven. Hasn't beat enough ranked guys to be in the title conversation, right? So I do get from that perspective why people are annoyed at this title fight. But when you look at the skills that Erceg has displayed in his past fights, I think he's really, really good. And I think he is a top 5 flyweight just based on his skill set. And I do think he can do a lot of things to cause Pantoja big problems this weekend. And I think he stands a great chance of winning. So I quite like this fight. Now, I'm very, 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 very tempted to bet Steve Erceg this weekend. I want to say that right from the offset. And I'm putting this video out before I've made my mind up on it. So, I don't know what I'm going to do. I need to give him more thought. Obviously, if I do bet Erceg, I will put it in the Discord. I'll also post it to the website. But I'm not sure about this one. I maybe want to listen to some more Fight Week interviews. I maybe want to wait for the ceremonial weigh-ins Friday. I'm having a tough time with this one. And the reason why I'm having such a tough time is when I look at the odds and I can see that Erceg's odds carry an implied probability of 38%. And I look at Pantoja's past fights and I look at Steve Erceg's strengths and weaknesses in his past performances. I think Erceg has got an amazing chance of winning this fight. So with him being the underdog and his odds only carrying an implied probability of 38%, Erceg is extremely tempting to me. To the extent that if this fight were on neutral territory, if these two are fighting in the Apex Center or in the T-Mobile in Vegas, I wouldn't even hesitate to bet Steve Erceg. But the reason why I'm having such a big problem betting Steve Erceg this weekend is because Pantoja is never an easy fight for anyone. The reason why we love him so much, the reason why he's so fun to watch, is because he's an absolute dog that puts on entertaining fights. He's tough, he's scrappy, he's got a strong will to win, and you're never going to go out there and have an easy night's work against Pantoja because he's the kind of guy that will keep fighting till his last breath. And so, when I sit back and I weigh everything up, I don't see this being a clean win for Erceg. I don't see it being an easy night's work for Erceg. I think he's going to have to go through hell to beat Pantoja. I think it's going to be a competitive fight. I think it's going to be a close fight. I think both guys are going to have their moments. And my problem with that is going back to what I said in the section of the video about home advantage. If you haven't watched it yet, please go watch it at the beginning of YouTube or the separate video that you'll find on my website. The problem I have with this is, as a general rule, whenever there is a UFC event where I think home advantage is going to be a big factor, which tends to be on cards in the UK, cards in Brazil, for example, where the fans are very passionate. In order for me to bet on a foreigner facing, a fighter who's competing in front of their home fans, I need to feel confident that the foreign fighter can either win inside the distance and take the judges out of the equation, or dominate to such an extent that there's just no possible way that even hometown judging could screw them over because they're so dominant. And that definitely isn't the case with Steve Erceg. When you look at how he matches up with Pantoja, I think he's got a great chance of winning this weekend. But if Erceg wins, it won't be easy. He'll have to go through hell. It'll be a war. He'll have to earn it. And in that kind of fight, I think it's going to be very, very difficult for him to win a decision against the Brazilian in Brazil. And that's the main problem that I have with this fight. On top of that, obviously, you guys know my approach to pre-fight betting. I tend to like to place a relatively safe pre-fight bet on a card to cover a potentially risky one. So if we think about some of the pre-fight bets we've had recently, we bet 2 units on Sarukian to beat Charles Oliveira at odds of like 1.50 minus 200. And then we placed a riskier bet on Jamal Hill, 1 unit, slight underdog odds, 2.10 plus 110, on the basis that Sarukian was very likely to win. Jamal Hill was a nice, calculated, risky underdog I felt had a great chance to win. And so if Hill were to lose, our bet on Sarukian would cover the loss. Then the event before that, we used a similar strategy where we wanted to place a higher risk bet on Dan Argueta underdog odds at like 2.45, which is plus 145. And then we had a much safer bet that I was very confident in on Norma Dumont at odds of 1.80 minus 125 to cover a potential loss on the riskier bet with Argueta. And we find ourselves in a similar situation for this card. Obviously, we've already locked in a bet on this card, which I'm very, very confident will hit. I'd be surprised if we lost that bet. And if that bet wins, we'll make about a unit. So I'm asking myself the question, do I want to potentially risk that nice clean unit of profit we're going to get on an Australian guy fighting a popular Brazilian in Brazil when he's not likely to get a finish and the fight is likely to be close and competitive? I'm in this situation where we're doing extremely well live betting on the UFC. We've really, started to build some good momentum there. We made a profit on 6 of the last 8 events. We're absolutely murdering on football betting. And we're probably going to make good profits live betting football this weekend. We've got a really solid pre-fight bet already on this card. So I'm in a situation where I know it's very likely I'm going to make money live betting the UFC this weekend. I know it's very likely I'm going to make money live betting football this weekend. I know it's very likely I'm going to make money pre-fight betting the UFC this weekend. So this weekend is shaping up to be really good for me. Is there any need for me to place a super risky bet on Steve Erceg and potentially give a little bit back to the bookies? Do I need to bet Erceg, or should I just, take the low-hanging fruit, essentially? Very keen to know what you think. At the end of the day, it's all about money for me, and I think I'm going to have a very good weekend this weekend. And so I'm in a situation where I know if I bet Erceg, I am gambling a bit, which typically I like to avoid wherever possible. I want to overwhelmingly stack the odds in my favour, and I know I'm not doing that with Erceg because it isn't going to be easy for him to win a decision in Brazil. Even if he does win 3 of the 5 rounds, you know what Brazilian judges are like. The crowd are going to be behind Pantoja, Uva Moer, all that thing. Pantoja's a dog, he's a fan favourite. It's going to be very hard for Steve Erceg. So that's where I'm at. But now it's about time that I talk to you about the reasons why I like Erceg in this fight, so you can understand the dilemma I'm in. So this is one of those fights where fundamentally the reason why I like Erceg so much in this fight is because I think Pantoja's cardio is really bad, and I think he's been very lucky to win his recent fights. I think that I don't want to take anything away from Pantoja, but I think Brandon Moreno and Brandon Royval damn near beat themselves, and if both those guys would have fought smarter, it would have been an easy night's work for both of them. It was clear that Pantoja was fading very hard in his last fight against Brandon Royval and gassing very bad, but Royval just couldn't stuff a takedown. Even when Pantoja's takedown entries weren't particularly good, he just couldn't keep that fight standing. He kept giving up cheap takedowns, which let Pantoja off the hook for being tired. And then in round 2 of the Moreno fight, Pantoja was absolutely gassed out of his mind in round 2. Completely gassed out of his mind to the extent where even the commentators were talking about it. And just like Moreno demonstrated bad fight IQ in his most recent matchup against Brandon Royval, Moreno just kept giving up cheap takedowns, giving up cheap positions on the ground, exposing his back, allowing Pantoja to take his back, and it was a fight that Moreno never should have lost. He demonstrated such bad fight IQ in this fight. So for me, these two, I don't want to take anything away from Pantoja, but these 2 performances, these 2 wins, said more about the things that Moreno and Royval did wrong than the things that Pantoja did right. And that's just my personal view on those matchups based on my experience. And I'm going to show you some footage to back that up. So before we get into showing a little bit of footage, I want to talk to you about how these two match up from a technical point of view. So in terms of how these two match up when it comes to striking, this is a fight which will start very even and it will start very competitively, but the longer the fight goes, the better I think Steve Erceg is going to do, to the point where by the 4th and 5th round I think Erceg will be, for the most part, causing Pantoja big problems on the feet and probably dominating. And the reason for that is that Pantoja is one of these guys that has big power for a flyweight. He's got big arm normal power for the division. He hits very hard. He can really hurt you on the feet. He lands mean, nasty, hard, impactful shots. And this power, this physicality, also translates into his grappling, which we'll go into in a moment. But he's definitely one of these guys that hits hard. If he stands in front of you and you box with him, he's going to hurt you bad. But like with a lot of guys that have abnormal power for their divisions, that power comes at a cost. And Pantoja does fade very quickly in fights. Usually around about the 7 or 8 minute mark in a fight, you'll start to see his volume drop, his hand speed slow. He'll become very flat-footed, very sloppy. Whereas Erceg, you go back and watch Erceg's fights, his cardio looks really good. He can fight at a high pace for 3 rounds. We haven't seen him in the UFC at 5 rounds, but he certainly can go hard for 3 rounds. And so this is one of those matchups where, you know, early on I think it's going to be razor close and competitive. I think Erceg is going to struggle to deal with the power and the impactfulness of Pantoja's shots. But Erceg moves well. He's pretty good defensively. He's a good boxer. He's reasonably technical. He throws a good volume of strikes. I think as soon as you start to see Pantoja slow a little bit, you'll really start to see Erceg put volume on him, start to outstrike him. And that might not come until the 3rd round, but it will come if Pantoja's fights are anything to go by. You know, unless he looks massively different compared to his past fights, Erceg's going to do pretty well in the second half of this matchup. Now, when it comes to grappling, it's a more difficult fight to read because we haven't seen Erceg face any grapplers that are anywhere near the level of Pantoja. And so, you know, when people are questioning why Erceg has even got a title shot, this is where, to some extent, I get where they're coming from, because Erceg's takedown defense and ground game, from my perspective, is completely unproven. What I will say is that offensively, Erceg's grappling looks pretty good. You know, Erceg looks like a decent MMA grappler, so I'm optimistic for his chances of, you know, defending himself in grappling positions against Pantoja. But ultimately, Pantoja is a super high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, a former Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu coach at Nova União, so where you see, you know, high-level fighters come out of that gym like Claudio Gadelha, you know, Renan Barão, Jose Aldo. You know, Pantoja was the guy who was their Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu coach, and we all know how good Gadelha was on the ground. I mean, Pantoja was even one of her assistant coaches when she was on The Ultimate Fighter against Joanna Jędrzejczyk. So Pantoja's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is top tier. Early in fights, his offensive wrestling is also pretty good. And Pantoja's one of these guys that, you know, we were saying earlier in the breakdown how he's tough as nails and a dog, and he's got no quit in him and a strong will to win. And like a lot of these BJJ guys like Rani Yahya or Damian Maia, who slow down a lot as fights progress, Pantoja's one of these guys that, because he gasses pretty bad in every fight, is well within his comfort zone to fight tired. So even when he's tired, just like a Dricus du Plessis, still very capable and still very dangerous, to the extent that he still finds ways to win even when he's absolutely exhausted. And he's at such a high level on the ground that if you make the slightest mistake, no matter how tired he is, no matter how hurt he is, he's skilled enough and smart enough to make you pay. And we saw that in the Brandon Moreno fight, where like I say, Pantoja was absolutely gassed out of his mind in that second round. But he found a way to win because any time Moreno exposed his back, Pantoja would jump on his back, lock in the body triangle, and then Moreno would be trapped for long periods of time and lose a lot of rounds because of that. And because we don't know a lot about Steve Erceg's takedown defense and ground game, we don't know what his chances are of defending himself on the ground against Pantoja. For all we know, Pantoja could take him down easily, dominate him in every round, right? That's possible. I'm optimistic that isn't going to happen because Erceg has shown flashes of pretty good MMA grappling in his past fights, but he certainly hasn't fought anyone anywhere near the level of Pantoja on the ground. But the reason why I'm optimistic for Erceg being, reasonably capable of defending himself against grappling positions in this fight is because Pantoja's one of these BJJ guys, like a Rani Yahya that we saw last weekend, or like a Damian Maia, that is in a bit of a tricky situation because, these guys that I've just mentioned, like Pantoja, grappling is the thing that tires them out the most. But they're in a bit of a paradoxical situation because it's also the thing that they do the best. So that's why you see these guys like Pantoja and Damian Maia evolve to include a lot of striking in their overall strategies over the years, because they don't have the cardio to grapple hard for 3 rounds, or especially 5 rounds, right? They just burn themselves out, they gas out, they slow down. And so that's why you see so many of Pantoja's fights take place on the feet over the last few years. It's because he doesn't have the cardio to grapple hard for 5 rounds. So, even though early on Erceg may not have the takedown defense or ground game to stop Pantoja from taking him down and controlling him on the ground, if Erceg can hang in there, what you notice about Pantoja in the 3rd, 4th, 5th round of his fights is that his takedown entries become very laboured. His top game's not as heavy. His grappling becomes much sloppier, which is obviously a lot easier to defend. And this is why I said, Brandon Moreno made so many catastrophic mistakes in his fights, because he just kept making basic errors on the ground, which exposed his back to Pantoja. And Erceg may make the same mistake. But whenever you've got a guy like Pantoja that slows down so much, I feel 5 rounds, if you can bet his opponent in a 5-rounder, they've always got a shot, because 25 minutes is a long time, for someone that tends to get tired in the 2nd round of pretty much all his fights that he's forced to work hard in. So whenever I break down a Pantoja fight, I always get people denying that his gas tank is bad. So what I always like to do is just play some footage so you can see it for yourself. So what we are going to do is, if we look at his past fights, so if we look at the these 2 fights are obviously not going to be, or this fight's not going to be particularly useful because it is it only lasted a minute and a half. But what we can do is look at this fight against Brandon Royval that ended in round 2. But even though it ended in round 2, there were also pretty strong signs that Pantoja was starting to look very, very tired here. So we'll bring this fight up. Last week's video, when I uploaded it to YouTube, had loads of copyright flags for me showing footage of past fights, which never usually happens. So hope that the YouTube algorithm hasn't changed, because it's much easier for me to do these breakdowns and show you guys things, or prove the kind of things I'm talking about when I show you footage to back it up. So remember, all we're really focusing on in this part of the breakdown is showing you guys how much Pantoja slows as fights wear on. So we don't really need to get into the weeds and break down, these 2 from a technical point of view, because this breakdown video is going to end up being much longer than it needs to be. So what we're going to do is we'll just skim through, and I'll just briefly fill you in on how this round's going, and then we'll pay attention to how tired Pantoja looks at the end of this round. So this fight's from back in 2021. And remember, with Pantoja being 34 years old, he's more than likely declining as time progresses because he's getting old for flyweight now. So it's not like I'd expect him to be getting better since 2021 when he was, 32 years old. I'd actually expect him to be getting worse. So we're just going to skim through. We know Pantoja's got amazing back takes. And you know what? This fight is actually a really good example for showing how quickly Pantoja tires out when there's a lot of grappling in his fights. Sorry to drag this out, but I really need to hit this point home. So remember we were saying that, guys like Rani Yahya, Damian Maia, Alexandre Pantoja, they have crushing physicality to their grappling control. But this comes at a cost in that their cardio is not the best. And they're in this paradoxical situation where the more they grapple, the faster they get tired. Pantoja gasses out way sooner in this fight than other matchups he's had, because the one thing Royval does pretty well in the first round of this fight is force Pantoja to work hard to maintain grappling control. We all know what Brandon Royval's like. He's very scrambly on the ground. So because of this, Pantoja has to work really hard on the ground to maintain dominant positions. Because of this, he burns through a lot of energy, and because of this, Pantoja looks a lot more tired towards the end of the first round of this fight than he would do usually. And we'll see that when we watch the Royval rematch, which was his most recent fight, and also the Brandon Moreno title fight, which I feel he was very lucky to win. Moreno kind of beat himself. So yeah, don't want to make this breakdown super long, but as I skip through, just pay attention to how scrambly Royval is on the ground and how hard Royval is making Pantoja work for these positions. They're getting into all kinds of crazy scrambles. Pantoja's being forced to work hard to get these takedowns and obtain dominant positions, and generally speaking, it's a pretty frantic start to the fight. So as they get back up, there's a minute and a half left to go in the round. What I want you to pay attention to as they get back up, and we watch the final minute and a half this round into round two, is just the breathing patterns, the body language, the movement, the hand speed of Pantoja. You'll see he looks very tired. Then what I want you to do is visualize, if you extrapolate this over 5 rounds and you think, if Steve Erceg can force Pantoja to fight at this pace in round 1, in your mind, think about how Pantoja could end up looking, in that 3rd, 4th and 5th round. So as they get back up, we'll take a look at Pantoja. Just skip through these grappling positions. Here we go. So it's just subtle little things here. Like as he gets back up, you'll see he takes a big visible deep breath. There it is. And then just pay attention to the sloppiness from him on his feet. How slow his hand speed is. You can see how his arms look very tired and heavy. And also notice, another telltale sign that he's tired here, is when he lets his hands go. Notice how when he resets, his hands are hanging quite low. This is just because he doesn't have the energy to keep them up, because he's burnt his arms out from all that grappling. And you could just see that his hand speed's very, very slow. Hands down low. Bad defensively. It's looking pretty sloppy on the feet. But we can also see he's got that big power that we spoke about at the beginning of this breakdown, where, like I say, that power, that physicality that Pantoja's got comes at a cost because he slows a lot in fights, but you can see from the impactfulness of his shots here, when Royval lands, Pantoja doesn't move back an inch. When Pantoja lands, he's obviously, hurting Royval and backing him up a lot. If you can just see on the feet here, just think that Pantoja looks very tired, very sloppy, and body language very early in a fight. Remember, we're only 5 minutes in to what could potentially be a 25-minute fight. It's not good, but again, he's not completely gassed out of his mind. We're still only in round 1. If we go into round 2, Here we go. We go into round 2. We'll skip forward just a little bit. Here we go. So remember, he's had a minute to recover in between rounds now, so Pantoja's going to have caught his breath a little bit. But again, just pay attention to his sloppiness on the feet. Shoots a takedown here. Royval pushes down on the head. Scrambles out of there. Now at this point in the fight, after a little sequence of grappling, you really start to see more tired body language from Pantoja. And you can just see in positions like this, where he's in on this body lock. And again, from this position, like if you watch a lot of MMA and you know what, you know, a strong tight body lock is, what strong grappling control in a position like this is, this doesn't look particularly strong to me. We know Royval's got very, very bad takedown defense. And just here, just gets dragged to the ground very easily. And just at that stage in the fight where you can see Pantoja is fading, Royval gets his back taken and gets choked out. But again, that was only the first round of a fight, so you're not going to see Pantoja looking super tired, right? But you can see signs towards the end of that round that he's just sloppy. Hands down low, hand speed not great. Showing some tired body language. And now we want to build on that. Show you footage of the Brandon Moreno fight. So again, what we're focusing on here is how much Pantoja slows. And to demonstrate that, we are going to go to midway through the second round. This is really where you start to see it. So Moreno's on his back here, and Pantoja scrambles back to his feet with 2 minutes left to go. Now bear in mind, this is a 25-minute fight against Moreno. It's a 25-minute fight against Erceg. So just want you to pay attention to how tired Pantoja looks at this stage in the fight, and then consider to yourself, if he's this tired at this stage in the fight against Erceg, he's got to hang in there for another 15 minutes. It's not going to be an easy thing to do. So again, just like the Royval fight that we just watched, pay attention to the hand speed of Pantoja, how sloppy he is on the feet, how bad he is defensively on the feet. And just pay attention to just his movement, his breathing patterns, his output. For me, he's a fighter that looks very tired here, and this is at a pretty early stage in the fight. You can see that there's periods of inactivity from him, where he doesn't really throw much. He's trying to catch his breath. And this second round is a good one to watch, because like I say, it just shows his inactivity, his low volume. You know, his sloppiness on the feet. But there again, you can see the impactfulness of his shots. When he lands, he hurts you, because he's got such an abundance of power. You can just see very low output from him, right? He's not really throwing, he's not really doing a lot. And where I said that Moreno kind of beat himself in this fight, one of the big reasons why he beat himself is because it was clear that Pantoja was tiring in this fight. But instead of Moreno staying on him, working the jab, chipping away with his leg kicks, forcing Pantoja to engage and work, Moreno would also have these long periods of inactivity where he would give Pantoja time to recover and catch his breath. You can just see how bad he is defensively here. Moreno landing clean, hard shots. And Pantoja's getting caught with these shots because he's tired. Not sharp enough to slip him, evade him, block him, move out the way. So if we go into round 3, he's just had a minute to recover in between rounds. So So again, we won't focus on the grappling positions because we know that Pantoja is a monster on the ground, and if he gets Erceg to the ground, Erceg's going to be in a lot of trouble. We want to focus on Pantoja's body language, breathing patterns, hand speed, movement when they're on the feet, because that tells the story of what his energy levels are like. It's harder to see him on the ground where he's just controlling Moreno from back control. So this is midway through round 3. And again, just pay attention to how he moves, body language, breathing patterns, hand speed, all that kind of stuff. You can just see that he's very bad defensively on the feet. Still has that power though. That power doesn't go. He still hits like a truck. But the thing with Pantoja is, the longer the fight goes, the less volume he throws on the feet and the worse he becomes defensively. So even though he carries that power deep into fights, he doesn't throw as many strikes the longer the fight goes. So that power becomes less of an issue. And he also becomes worse defensively. So even though he will land the odd big shot that hurts you, he's taking so much damage himself that unless he's going to knock you out, it's not, you know, the odd big singular power shot, big kick, big right hand that he loads up on just aren't enough to outwork most guys in this division on the feet. But then Pantoja shoots a very nice takedown. Moreno stuffs it. And this is a sequence that is really important to pay attention to. And we don't really have the best quality footage to drive this point home from Pantoja's recent matchups. But when you look at Pantoja's offensive wrestling from a technical point of view in the second half of this Moreno fight and the second half of the Brandon Royval fight, to me, Pantoja's offensive wrestling doesn't look very good. Doesn't generate much drive on his entries. A lot of his takedown entries are very high up above his opponent's hips. And this is where, you know, when we go back to earlier in the breakdown video, I say that Moreno and Royval damn near beat themselves in these fights. It's because even though the offensive wrestling from Pantoja is not very good in the second half of these matchups, Moreno and Royval just keep giving up cheap takedowns. So I can't really drive home the point to you of how badly I think Pantoja may struggle in the second half of the fight against Erceg if Erceg's defensive wrestling is reasonably good, because Pantoja does actually have success with a lot of these takedowns, even though when you look at the technique, the energy levels, the drive, the physicality behind these takedown attempts from Pantoja, they're not particularly impressive. And this is a good example here. So he drives in here quite high up above Pantoja's hips initially, drops in a little bit deeper on the legs after he drives through. But you can see there's loads of space in there for Moreno to get these underhooks. He gets, you know, double underhooks relatively easily, and, you know, stuffs this takedown pretty easily. And for me, that takedown just looked very weak from Pantoja. Very weak, very ineffective. No drive. Didn't even come close to upsetting Moreno's balance. A very laboured takedown attempt. And I just wanted to look at Pantoja's body language as Moreno stuffs this takedown. He takes a big deep breath, arms drop down to his side. He looks demoralised. Take a look here. Just a second, watch. Look at this body language. Arms down by his side. Back in on another desperation takedown attempt. And that time, you know, this is the real problem with this fight. Moreno just gives this up so cheaply. Like, you look at this. You know, he's got an underhook on the left side. And Pantoja just able to use his strength to drag Moreno to the ground. And this was really the story of the fight where, you know, Moreno just kept giving up cheap takedowns, which cost him. But, you know, when you get tired, you make mistakes like this on the ground. And Pantoja gets overly aggressive trying to jump on top of Moreno with that ground and pound and gives up top position. And then they back up to the feet with a minute left to go. Now, I want you to pay close attention to the breathing patterns, the body language of Pantoja and everything towards the end of the third. Bear in mind what I've been saying throughout this breakdown about how I think Erceg can do really well in the second half of this fight. This sequence really shows that, because if you think about it, this is 38 seconds left to go in round 3. there's still another 10 minutes in this fight. Moreno just happens to completely implode in the final 2 rounds of this matchup. But just look at this, man. Just look at this. Just look at this with 30 seconds left to go. Big deep breaths from Pantoja. He's backing up, trying to avoid engaging. Hands down by his side. And these sequences are really frustrating to watch because you can see Pantoja's tired and he's trying to avoid engaging so he can catch his breath. And for the most part, Moreno kind of lets him off the hook. He gives him that time to recover instead of staying on him. Alright, into round 4. Again, beginning of the round. Just pay attention. Breathing patterns, body language, striking defense, hand speed. It's just a real sloppiness to him on the feet. So obviously, one thing to remember in these rounds, a fighter's always going to be fresher at the beginning of the round because they've just had a minute to recover in between rounds. So what you want to do is focus a lot on how fighters look in the second half of rounds. And this is just one of those rounds where Moreno gives up a lot of cheap takedowns. Basically throws the round away. And you can see again here Pantoja when he gets up just takes a big deep breath. And again, hand speed very slow, bad defensively. But it's the cheap takedowns that Moreno keeps giving up, which lets Pantoja off the hook. You kind of see 2 recurring themes throughout this fight, where Pantoja gets tired throughout this matchup, past sort of the midway point of round 2. And when he gets tired, he does one of 2 things. And Moreno allows him to do pretty much both, more often than not throughout this fight. The first thing that he does, Pantoja eases off the gas and stops throwing. And instead of Moreno staying on him, pumping the jab, throwing the leg kicks, forcing him to engage, forcing him to work, he does this. And you get long periods of inactivity from Moreno where he gives Pantoja these 20, 30, 40 second breaks to catch his breath and recover, to then go and shoot the next takedown or to then throw the next combination. Or the other thing that Pantoja does is he uses the energy that he's, recharge from those long periods of inactivity to then shoot the takedown, and Moreno gives the takedowns up very, very cheaply. This is just a pattern that plays out over and over again. So when I researched the fight between Erceg and Pantoja this weekend, I'm thinking to myself, if Erceg's done his homework on Pantoja, doesn't make the same mistakes that Moreno made, doesn't give up the cheap takedowns, when Pantoja's looking to take these breaks, if Erceg stays on him, which to be fair, he's a pretty aggressive guy, he does throw a high volume of strikes, I think Pantoja can really struggle in this fight and start to drown in the second half of this matchup. But as you can see from this fight that I'm playing, Pantoja's never going to be an easy fight. Even after he's taken tons of damage in this matchup and has been looking pretty tired since midway through the second, he's such a dog, he's such a warrior, he digs deep, keeps pushing, keeps fighting, even when he gets tired. And that's not going to be an easy thing for Erceg to deal with in his UFC debut. Or, not UFC debut, first ever UFC title fight, first ever UFC main event. It's a big step up in competition. Pantoja's an absolute warhorse. But as we watch this fight, you could just see long periods of inactivity from Pantoja. And the reason why you get these long periods of inactivity is because he's trying to catch his breath and recover. And Moreno's just letting him do it. Letting him do it. And then he's charged up enough energy to commit hard to that takedown. And just knocks Moreno over. So what we are going to do now is take a look at Pantoja's last fight against Brandon Royval. Now, Pantoja didn't look like super tired in this fight because Royval's takedown defense wasn't good enough to actually make him work as hard as Moreno could.
The official blockchain of UFC.
But you still get to see that there are moments in this fight where momentum could really have swung in Royval's favour. But Royval just wasn't able to make it, make Pantoja pay for slowing because he didn't have the takedown defense to stop Pantoja from taking him down. So, here we go. So this is in the round 3. So Pantoja's taking Royval down easily. And Royval manages to scramble back up to his feet. And again, like with the past 2 fights we've watched, just pay attention to the breathing patterns, the body language, the movement, the hand speed of Pantoja as they get back up. So again, tired body language as they stand back up. Hands down by his side, carrying his hands quite low. And you can see a definite momentum swing in Royval's favour. Now if you watch this fight in its entirety, this is where you'll see Pantoja try to do the same thing that he did against Brandon Moreno, where he's used a lot of energy grappling. He's tired, so he wants to avoid engaging so that he can basically recharge his batteries to shoot the next takedown attempt. And Royval gets on him and stays on him. So he starts coming forward, pumping the jab, and you can see that Pantoja just wants to circle away and avoid engaging because he's tired and he wants to catch his breath. You see, like little sequences like this give away that Pantoja's tired. He's got his hands up here, but he's exhausted. And what he really wants to do is get a break here and catch his breath. And the sign that he's doing that is he just circles away and lowers his hands. Watch, just circles away now. Any second, circles away, lowers his hands, takes a deep breath. Circles away, lowers his hands. See how he's taking a deep breath? Keeps taking his big deep breaths and he circles away and he tries to avoid. Now, in this position, if Pantoja's facing a guy that has got good takedown defense, potentially like Steve Erceg, this is where Pantoja can find himself in a fair amount of trouble, because we can see here that Pantoja's not throwing anything because he doesn't have the energy. So Royval's staying on him, and he just doesn't have the energy to throw. He's trying to catch his breath, right? Royval stays on him, so he can't catch his breath. This is where a guy like Erceg can have a lot of success, because if he cannot make the same mistake both Royval and Moreno have made and stay on Pantoja when he's looking to take these breaks and then not give up the takedowns when he tries to alleviate the pressure he's under with takedowns, Erceg stands a great chance of winning, man. But the problem with the Moreno and Royval fights, which is really frustrating, is when Pantoja fought Moreno, he got away with slowing down a lot, because when he was tired, Moreno didn't push him and press him hard on the feet, which meant Pantoja got these long periods of inactivity against Moreno to catch his breath and then throw those big combinations, shoot those big takedowns. And then in the Royval fight, even though Royval did stay on him, Royval's takedown defense was so bad that every time momentum started to swing in Royval's favour and Pantoja found himself in a bit of trouble, Royval would just give up a cheap takedown and Pantoja would get away with the fact that he was fading. But what I do want you to pay attention to in this fight is how bad Pantoja's takedown entries are. Like, how high up above Royval's hips they are. And this isn't good, because remember, Royval's a long, tall guy. I think he's 5'9", which is really tall and lanky for a flyweight. So when Pantoja shoots, naturally he should also always be getting in deep on the legs and hips of Royval. But you see, like here, laboured takedown attempt, loads of time and space for Royval to get these double underhooks in play. But Royval, his takedown offense is just not good. But look, he stays on Pantoja, forcing him to fight in an uncomfortable range. He pressures him, and again, not much volume from Pantoja. Tired, sloppy body language, low volume, big deep breath there, hands down low. But Royval does a better job of staying on Pantoja, forcing him to back up, pressuring him. And look at how the pressure takes away the volume of Pantoja, right? Notice how Pantoja's not liking the pressure. In the Moreno fight, what you'd see is both guys stood in the middle of the octagon. Moreno would land some strikes. Then there'd be 30, 40 seconds where neither guy really landed anything. They just stood in the middle of the octagon. And then Pantoja would have a chance to catch his breath and uncork one of those big combinations. He's not able to do that here because Royval's forcing him to fight in an uncomfortable range, pressuring him, pumping that jab, and taking away Pantoja's ability to recover. But unfortunately, Royval just has no takedown defense, and so he wasn't able to make Pantoja pay for slowing. So even again here, not the best takedown entry, laboured entry, high up above Royval's hips. Royval's got a nice underhook on the left side, and there just doesn't seem to be much physicality to these takedown entries from Pantoja at all. You know, Royval's got another the underhook now on the right side. You know, Pantoja looks very weak in this position. And again, back to the middle of the octagon, midway point through round 3. And again, remember, you know, Erceg, you know, in this 5-rounder between Erceg and Pantoja, it's going to be another 10 minutes in this fight. You know what I mean? It's potentially a very tough fight for Pantoja. I mean, we know it's going to be a tough fight for Erceg, but there's for sure ways Erceg can win this. And again, look, where are the big combinations from Pantoja? Remember when Pantoja was loading up on those big combinations against Moreno? Where are they here? They're not here because Royval is smothering him in pressure. He's not giving him the time and space he needs to recover. That's why you're not seeing those big combinations from Pantoja we saw in the Moreno fight. Notice how Royval's constantly coming forward and pressuring Pantoja. So low volume from Pantoja. Bad defense. And you can see a big momentum swing in Royval's favour in this fight, but keeps giving up cheap takedowns, and that costs him. Now you can imagine, right? Pantoja looks like this against Erceg. Erceg, decent MMA grappler, decent power in his hands, throws a high volume strikes. Potentially better takedown defense than Pantoja. Potentially better takedown defense than Royval. I mean, look, you know, Pantoja doesn't really have very much here, but Royval just has no takedown defense and falls over, essentially. You look into round 4. You know, again, beginning of round 4, Pantoja's just had a minute to recover in between rounds. You know, shoots a pretty laboured takedown attempt there. You know, Royval's got the underhook on the right side. You wouldn't expect Pantoja to get this, but Royval's takedown defense is so bad that, you know, Pantoja transitions from a high crotch single leg to a double leg, gets it. We scroll through, we know Royval's very, very weak off his back, weak on the ground. And Pantoja's, you know, top game grappling control, even when tired, excellent. Back control, excellent. Back takes, he's like a bloody ninja. Guy's amazing. So spends most of the round just dominating Royval from top position. Into round 5. If we look at round 5 here again, remember that Pantoja's just had a minute to recover in between rounds. But look how slow his hand speed is. Look how bad his striking defense is. Very slow hand speed. I mean, just look how bad he is defensively, man. He's slow, he's sloppy. You can see he's tired here, man. I know we're in round 5, but he's been looking like this since round 3. It's just Royval's really picking the pace up now. Look how tired this body language is. I just think if Erceg's got decent takedown defense and can survive on the ground early, I think Pantoja's in a lot of trouble this weekend. He might need some help from the Brazilian judges. Look how sloppy he is on the feet, man. Do we need to watch the whole round? You get the idea, right? You can see that at this stage in the fight, he doesn't really have that impactfulness on his shots anymore. He's faded that much that his hand speed is just so slow, he can't really hurt Royval on the feet. But Royval's takedown offense is very, very bad. And he gives up another cheap takedown. So yeah, man, it's one of those fights where it's like, you know, I'm so tempted to bet Erceg. Just let me know what you think, man. Let me know what you think. This breakdown video is already pretty long, so I don't really want to go and show you footage of Erceg because that'll just make it way longer. But he's got good cardio, decent MMA grappling, decent power in his hands, fights at a high pace, good volume. I just think he can cause Pantoja problems this weekend. If we take a look at the over-under on this one, we move into the prop bets now. So the over-under is set at over 3.5 rounds in the even money odds range. My lean would be on this fight going deep. I'm not going to bet the over-under on this one because we don't know how Erceg is going to deal with competing under the bright lights of the UFC in his first main event, first title fight. It's also possible that Erceg's ground game could be really low level, so he just won't be able to hang on the ground against someone with, you know, the level of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu that Pantoja has. My lean would be over 3.5 rounds on the over-under, but I'm not going to be betting that myself. In terms of the prop bets on this one, if I was going to bet a prop, I'm not going to, but if you want to sprinkle a little bit of money on this fight to make watching more interesting, I would go Erceg by decision at odds of 6.5 plus 550. So let me know what you think about this fight, guys. I haven't made my mind up yet. I'm not sure what to do. Very tempted by Erceg, but it's not going to be an easy fight for him, and it isn't easy beating Brazilians in Brazil. Let me know what you think. Alright, now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is a super interesting matchup between Jonathan Martinez and Jose Aldo. So, Jonathan Martinez was one of the first names that jumped out at me as a potential bet on this card. I actually liked Jonathan Martinez so much in this fight that I researched this matchup about 2.5 weeks ago because I thought Martinez in the even money odds range would be an absolute gift. And obviously his odds have declined since then. We can see that his odds have continued to decline. From about 1.80 minus 125 down to where they currently are at around an average of 1.61, which is going to be minus 164 for an implied probability of 62%. So if we take a look at the odds on Aldo, he's around an average of 2.35, which is plus 135 for an implied probability of 43%. So this was one of those fights where as soon as I saw Martinez was fighting Aldo in the even money odds range, I just thought Martinez would be a great bet. So as soon as I saw the fight, I rushed to research it. But it was one of those matchups where after I researched it, I didn't like Martinez as much as I thought I would. And that's why I haven't bet him. And I was still thinking about betting him, but then the odds declined from 1.80 to 1.61, and that kind of made my mind up that I wasn't going to be betting Martinez because I didn't love Martinez in that even money odds range, and I definitely don't like him at 1.61 minus 164. I do think it's more likely Martinez wins this weekend. I just have some concerns for him in this matchup. where there's a lot of things that can make this a tough fight for him. So if we start off by considering the X factors, the tail of the tape. So Martinez is 30 years old, 5'8", with a 69.5-inch reach. Aldo is 37 years old, 5'7", with a 70-inch reach. So both guys roughly the same size. Obviously there's a big difference in age. Aldo is 37 years old. He's going to be 38 years old later this year, which is very, very, very old for the bantamweight division. Now, even though there's only a 7-year age gap in this fight, which statistically gives Martinez around about a 67% chance of winning, the age between these two, or the age gap between these two, is kind of at that sweet spot where we know at almost 38 years old, Aldo is going to be declining from fight to fight. And Martinez at 30 years old, just in his prime, still improving, going to be getting better from fight to fight. So obviously when we talk about age statistics, that 67% stat of the younger fighter winning 67% of the time when there's a 7-year age gap in a fight, that's an average. So that's from when, 33-year-olds will fight 26-year-olds, or 25-year-olds will fight 32-year-olds. Where that statistical advantage for the younger fighter probably isn't as big, because the guy in their early 30s is not really declining. When you get to a 30-year-old fighting a 37, 38-year-old, that's where that statistic is really powerful and meaningful. And if you just, did some data analysis on, how often a 30-year-old beats a 37, 38-year-old when they fight, I would imagine the statistic would be far higher than 67%. So age is a big factor in this fight that definitely favours Jonathan Martinez. Now, there are a few more X factors on this matchup. So, Aldo used to find it difficult to cut down to featherweight. He's obviously changed his diet. He's had a few fights at bantamweight now. But he does look like he has to kill himself to make the bantamweight limit. And as you get older, you'd imagine that weight cut would become harder and harder and harder. And I feel Aldo's one of these guys that has had so many brutal weight cuts throughout his career that it's got to take something out of him and can maybe accelerate the rate at which he declines. On top of that, he's had almost 40 pro fights. So even though he's one of the greatest fighters of all time, 40 pro fights, it's a lot of fights, it's a lot of miles on the clock, it's a lot of wear and tear on the body. Now, to be fair to Aldo, he didn't take much damage in a lot of his career fights because he was so damn good that guys couldn't get near him. They were often in a defensive shell against him. But still, 40 pro fights, it's a lot of fights, a lot of miles on the clock. A lot more miles on the clock than someone like Martinez has got almost half the number of fights that Aldo does. On top of that, we haven't seen Aldo fight in MMA for a very long time. Around 18 months. Since August 2022. So we don't know how much he's declined in that time. I have gone back and watched his boxing fights from 2023 and he looks alright, but even then he hasn't fought since July 2023. So we don't know how he's going to look. We don't know how much he's declined since he fought Devashvili back in 2022. Last time we got a really good look at his striking was December 2021 against Rob Font. Obviously at this stage in a fighter's career they can decline a lot in a short space of time. Father Time is undefeated. So there's a lot of X factors in Martinez's favour. The layoff for Aldo, the weight cuts for Aldo, the age difference, all goes in Martinez's favour. But of course, Aldo does have home advantage on his side. And home advantage is going to be a big deal this weekend. And remember what I said in the breakdown for the Erceg versus Jonathan Martinez fight. The Erceg versus Pantoja fight. When I am coming into a card like this, I know it's going to be very difficult for non-Brazilians to beat Brazilians, right? Home advantage is going to be big. So my general rule for betting cards like this is, In order for me to bet on a non-Brazilian, I have to feel confident that they can either win inside the distance and take the judges out of the equation, or dominate their opponent so much to the extent where the judges can't possibly fuck it up. And just like with Erceg against Pantoja, I don't feel it's that likely that Martinez finishes Aldo, because Aldo's tough as nails, very difficult to finish. If we look at his record, I mean, you know, it is not easy to finish this guy. This guy's only been finished by the best of the best, right? Peter Yan, Max Holloway, Conor McGregor. Outside of that, that's it. You know, top tier fighters have finished this guy, that's about it. But obviously you're not going to be as durable at 37 years old. All those weight cuts, all those wars could really be catching up to Aldo. But at least in recent years, he's still been very difficult to finish. And obviously he only got finished against Peter Yan through exhaustion in the 5th round. And this is a 3-round fight against Martinez. So, I don't think it's that likely Martinez finishes Aldo. And again, similar to Erceg against Pantoja, I don't think Martinez is going to go out there and totally dominate Aldo either. Which means Martinez probably has to rely on winning a competitive fight by decision against a popular Brazilian. In fact, one of the most popular Brazilians ever in Brazil. It's not going to be an easy thing to do. This is Jose Aldo's hometown. He's from Rio. But from a stylistic point of view, I do favour Jonathan Martinez, because the one thing that I've noticed about Aldo in recent years is that his volume's fallen off a cliff. These days he just doesn't throw very much, and that makes him easy to outpoint. When he does open up and he does throw strikes, he's very effective. His boxing's great, his kicking game is great, but because he's 37 years old now, he obviously can't fight at the pace he used to. So he does have to have these long periods of inactivity where he paces himself. And this makes it easy to outwork him. Now, having said that, Martinez has still got to pull the trigger, still got to take the fight to Aldo, still got to try to outstrike him. But Aldo throws such a low volume of strikes these days that if he doesn't score knockdowns or finish you inside the distance, it's going to be difficult for him to win a decision, especially against a young, hungry, aggressive bull like Martinez that does throw a high volume of strikes. So, in terms of how these two match up when it comes to grappling, I wouldn't expect to see any grappling in this fight. Aldo never tries to take guys down. Martinez very rarely tries to take guys down. Both these guys have good takedown defense. They're difficult to hold down. I'd imagine this would be a stand-up fight. If this stays standing, Martinez throws a much higher volume of strikes than Aldo does. And because of that, I do think the most likely outcome is that Martinez just outpoints and outworks Aldo to a decision. The aspects of this fight where things get interesting, though, is that Martinez is one of these guys that tends to get rocked, wobbled, dropped, knocked down in a lot of his fights. I don't think this is because Martinez is chinny. I think this is because Martinez is one of these guys that very much backs himself. It bets on his chin against his opponents. So Martinez looks to beat you in the exchange. He looks to get into exchanges with you and exchange big shots. And because of that, he gets caught frequently. And as a result, gets wobbled frequently. Now, Aldo's got fast hands, pinpoint accuracy, big knockout power. They say power's the last thing to go. And Aldo is by far the better boxer out of these two. If these two get into exchanges, I could definitely see Aldo hurting Martinez very bad. And the reason why I say Aldo is a much better boxer is because Martinez has a kicks-based style of striking. So Martinez's boxing's not great. The majority of Martinez's strikes are kicks. He likes to chip away at his opponents with a high volume of kicks. He's got great leg kicks, good range finding kicks, decent kicks all round. He lands hard, nasty, mean, impactful kicks. Aldo, of course, is the king of leg kicks, although he doesn't throw that many these days. But I just think it's one of those things where it's not going to be easy for a guy like Jonathan Martinez to outpoint a guy like Aldo with kicks and win a decision in Rio, Brazil, when the crowd's chanting "Uva Moe" for the king of Rio himself, Aldo. You know what I mean? It's one of those situations where I feel like Martinez is really going to need to put it on Aldo and dominate this fight. And that's not an easy thing to do unless you've got boxing to go with the kicks. And Martinez's boxing isn't great. But he does throw a much higher volume of strikes than Aldo. So it is a very interesting fight. I heavily lean towards Martinez. I do heavily lean towards Martinez. I think he gets the win. I can't bet him at these odds. I didn't love him when he was in the even money odds range. But I do think he wins this. I can't imagine Aldo at 37 years old is going to look particularly good. But when I researched this fight, I just wasn't impressed by Martinez's boxing, and that's what put me off him. On top of the fact that Aldo's got home advantage. I do think Martinez wins. So in terms of the over-under on this fight, if we just refresh, get the latest odds. Where are we? Here we go. Where are we? Okay, so in terms of the over-under, it's set at over 2.5 rounds. So it is quite likely this fight goes deep. Aldo's obviously a decisionator. You know, many of his fights over the last few years have gone to a decision. Martinez frequently goes to decisions as well. So it is quite likely this fight goes deep. I certainly wouldn't bet the under in this fight. But I wouldn't bet the over either because the odds are very steep. So I would give that a miss. In terms of the prop bets, the only prop I would consider is Martinez by decision. The odds aren't very good. If you do want to sprinkle a little bit of money on this fight to make watching more interesting, go Martinez decision, but the odds are pretty bad. Alright, now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Petrino against Anthony Smith. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Petrino is a massive favourite at average odds of around 1.18, which is going to be minus 556 for an implied probability of 85%. If we take a look at the odds on Smith, he's around an average of 5.10, which is going to be plus 410 for an implied probability of 20%. So Smith is 35 years old, 6'4" with a 76-inch reach. Petrino, 26 years old, 6'2" with a 77.5-inch reach. So, a couple of X factors on this fight to dig into. We can see that there's not that big of a size difference between these two. They're roughly about the same size. Petrino slightly longer reach, Smith a little bit taller, nothing major. Obviously, Petrino has home advantage in his side. We don't need to go over the reasons why that's a pretty big deal in a matchup like this. But another big X factor to take into consideration is that Petrino is 9 years younger than Anthony Smith, which statistically gives him around about a 70% chance of winning the fight. On top of that, Anthony Smith has got almost 60 pro fights, and he's got a lot of miles on the clock. We've seen him take a lot of damage in fights. He's been rocked, wobbled, dropped, knocked out a lot. You know, that fight against Glover where he had his teeth knocked out. It's been a long, hard career for Anthony Smith. Whereas Petrino, young, hungry, up-and-coming bull. He's had 20% the amount of fights that Smith has had. 26 years old, making big improvements. He's mean, he's nasty, he's athletic, he's well-rounded, he's powerful. It's a very difficult fight for Anthony Smith, which is why he's a big favourite. So, it's not impossible that Smith could win this fight. You know, there are weaknesses in Petrino's skill set, which Smith could potentially exploit. It's just not going to be easy. So, the one area where Smith could potentially cause Petrino a problem would be when it comes to strikings. We'll go into that in a moment. When it comes to grappling, I give Petrino quite a big advantage. Now, Petrino's not a particularly skilled MMA grappler, but he's a strong, young, hungry bull that has a lot of physicality to his grappling, heavy top game, good grappling control. And we know that Anthony Smith's takedown offense is quite bad. He's quite weak off his back. So if Petrino were to grapple in this fight, I think he would do pretty well against Smith. In terms of striking, there are issues with Petrino's striking. He doesn't throw a particularly high volume of strikes. He's quite bad defensively. He's also a bit slow and sloppy at times. But he does hit very hard. He can be aggressive. And, you know, he's one of these guys that has a strong will to win, and he does have the dog in him. Anthony Smith, more of a volume striker. He likes to chip away at you from behind the jab. Does throw a higher volume of strikes than Petrino. Doesn't have the same power. Doesn't have the same impactfulness in his shots. He's also a little bit slow and sluggish and clunky. Petrino's probably got that speed edge in this fight. So this is one of those matchups where it's, on the feet, it's the volume of Smith versus the power, the athleticism, the physicality of Petrino. This is one of those matchups where if the fight stays standing, I could see Petrino's volume making it reasonably close. But with Petrino having his grappling to fall back on, if he does get into trouble on the feet at any point in this fight, he should be able to go to his grappling, take Smith down, beat him up on the ground. So it is a very difficult fight for Smith. Obviously, Petrino's more likely to win this. His odds reflect that. But you can't bet him in this odds range. He's far too big of a favourite. So if you really, 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 really want to bet this fight, you kind of got to go dog or pass with Anthony Smith. But it's not very likely he's going to win. Because like I say, if Petrino does go to grappling in this fight, then Smith's in a lot of trouble. And on top of that, we know that Smith is very slow. Not the best defensively. Petrino's an absolute tank on the feet. Hits very hard. So could easily knock Smith out on the feet. So yeah, it's a bit of a dead fight for betting, really. Which is a shame because the co-main event and the main event are such great fights. So in terms of the over-under on this one, it's difficult to say, really. We know Anthony Smith is really tough, so it's not easy to get him out of there. We know he can take a lot of damage in fights, even though he's not the best defensively, both standing up or on the ground. He's not easy to get out of there. We know Petrino's a tough guy that has got a pretty good chin, that isn't afraid of a war. Smith isn't particularly dangerous these days, more of a volume striker. So I don't think it's that likely that Smith will finish Petrino. Petrino's very dangerous. He could finish Smith, but it's still not that easy to get Smith out of there. If you look at his record, he went deep against Khalil Roundtree. He went deep against Khalil Roundtree. Went the distance against Johnny Walker. Distance with Alexander Rakic. Deep with Glover. Not easy to get Smith out of there, man. So, my lean would be over 1.5 rounds, but with how bad Smith is defensively, how heavy Petrino hits, or how hard Petrino hits, I wouldn't be touching the over in that odds range. It's too steep for me. I would give that a miss. In terms of the prop bets on this one, most likely outcome on this is Petrino by knockout or TKO, but the odds are terrible. So if you really, really want to sprinkle a little bit of money on this fight to make watching more interesting, I'd actually go for Petrino by decision, just on the basis that Anthony Smith is so tough that even if Petrino completely mauls him, he still might not be able to get a finish. Smith might just hang in there. I'm not going to be betting it myself. I don't like the odds. But if you want to make watching this a bit more interesting, gamble a little bit, that's a prop for you to consider. So I hope you found that useful. Now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to involve another heavy favourite, as Michel Pereira takes on Ihor Potieria. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Pereira is an even bigger favourite than Vitor Petrino at average odds of around 1.15, which is going to be minus 667 for an implied probability of 87%. We take a look at the odds on Potieria. He is around an average of, it's quite a big odds spread, we will say 5.75, which is going to be plus 475 for an implied probability of 17%. So Pereira, 30 years old, 6'1" with a 73-inch reach. Potieria, 27 years old, 6'3" with a 75-inch reach. So we can see both guys roughly the same age. Not a massive difference in size either. Potieria a bit bigger, slightly longer reach, which you'd expect because obviously he's previously fought at light heavyweight and now he's moved down to middleweight. And of course, Pereira previously fought at welterweight, and now he in his last few fights has moved up to middleweight. So you'd expect Potieria to be a bit bigger. Will also be interesting to see, you know, how these two look at the ceremonial weigh-ins, to see if there is any kind of size advantage for Potieria, which you do occasionally get. You know, sometimes on the tail of the tape it doesn't look like there's going to be much of a size difference. Then when you see him at the face-offs, there actually is. So with Pereira previously fighting at welterweight, Potieria previously fighting at light heavyweight, this is one that I would keep an eye on. But at least by the tail of the tape, it doesn't look like there's going to be a massive size difference between these two. On top of that, Pereira is also Brazilian, so he will have home advantage for this fight, which is a pretty big advantage, because if we go back a few years in Pereira's career in the UFC, he did in his first few fights, you know, quite frequently go to a decision. He's finished his last two relatively quickly. Also, with these fights being at middleweight, maybe Pereira's got more finishing power, maybe he's more dangerous at middleweight. But you can see when he was at welterweight, his fights frequently went deep. So having home advantage really helps in a fight like this, because if it does go the distance, I don't think this is going to be one of those matchups where Potieria dominates. At best, I think Potieria could hope for, you know, this being a really close competitive fight, maybe a next decision, which isn't going to be easy against the Brazilian in Brazil with hometown advantage on his side. So it's a real difficult fight for Potieria, this. In terms of how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, we know that Potieria's takedown offense and ground game is very bad. We've also seen Potieria gas pretty bad whenever he's been forced to grapple earlier in his career. Now, Pereira's not someone that grapples that much. He doesn't try and take his opponents down that often, but he does from time to time. And because of how bad Potieria's looked on the ground, if Pereira were to grapple in this fight, Pereira would have the advantage. So straight away, that's one thing on top of his home advantage, which starts to justify him being such a big favourite in this fight. Now, in terms of how these two match up when it comes to striking, difficult to say how Pereira's striking is going to look in this new middleweight division, because his two fights at middleweight have ended very, very quickly. But if his fights at welterweight are anything to go by, we know he likes to bounce around on the outside, use a lot of footwork and movement to stay out of a range where he can be hit. And he likes to attack you with blitzing attacks, where he'll blitz forward in straight lines, throwing straight punch karate combinations, spinning shit, flying knees, all that kind of stuff. Pereira does fade, to be fair, at welterweight. He does slow down as fights wear on. It's probably not going to be a huge issue in this fight because Potieria slows as well, but it is possible that Pereira's cardio could look a lot better at middleweight. We don't know because we haven't seen him fight for more than, you know, just over a minute in the middleweight division in the UFC. And it's certainly possible that a big guy like Pereira could have slowed down at welterweight because of the bad weight cuts. So this is one of those matchups where Pereira does move better on the feet. He is more technical. You know, Potieria is improving, so Pereira doesn't necessarily throw a higher volume of strikes than Potieria, but he's certainly the more technical. Better defensively for sure. Better grappler, home advantage. You know, these are all reasons to like Pereira in this fight. He's too big of a favourite to obviously consider betting, but of course he's more likely to win. It's a tough fight for Potieria. If you bet, it is dog or pass at the end of the day. You'd have to be crazy to bet Pereira in this odds range, but it's not very likely Potieria wins. If you do bet him in this fight, you're putting your money in a lot of danger. In terms of the over-under on this one, tricky. Very, very tricky. It's tricky because Potieria is making big improvements. His cardio is a lot better at middleweight. He moves a lot better at middleweight. He looked alright in his last fight against Erceg. And 7.5 minutes in the octagon isn't very long. I'm not going to bet the over-under on this one because both guys are wild. They're both aggressive. They do have stopping power. They are dangerous. But my lean on the over-under would be over 1.5 rounds. Just on the basis that we might be seeing a little bit of variance in Pereira's past fights where these two fights have ended very quickly. Prior to that, you know, he went over 1.5 rounds in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of his first 8 fights in the UFC. And Potieria at middleweight looks a lot better, cardio a lot better. In his last fight, cruised to a decision as well. So my lean would be the over. I wouldn't bet it because both guys are quite wild, aggressive. They're both dangerous. But my lean would be the over. In terms of the props on this one, so Pereira by knockout or TKO, the most likely outcome, but the odds are terrible. So if you're looking to sprinkle a little bit of money on a prop to make watching it more interesting, the prop I would go for is Pereira by decision. I won't be betting it myself. I don't love it, but if you want to gamble for fun, I think that's the second most likely prop to hit. Alright, now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Caio Borralho versus Paul Craig, another big favourite. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Borralho, massive favourite, average odds of around 1.17, which is minus 588 for an implied probability of 85%. If we take a look at the odds on his opponent, Paul Craig, we can see that he's an average of about 5.5, which is going to be plus 450 for an implied probability of 18%. So Paul Craig, 36 years old, 6'3", with a 76-inch reach. Borralho, 31 years old, 6'1", with a 75-inch reach. So both guys roughly the same size. We can see that Paul Craig's getting quite old for 36. He'll be 37 later on this year. Whereas Caio Borralho, 31 years old, in his prime, going to be getting better and better from fight to fight. Whereas you would expect Paul Craig to be declining. So you don't need me to tell you this. It's a very bad stylistic matchup for Paul Craig, because both of these guys have a base in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And while not only is Borralho the better Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner, but he also has home advantage, he's younger, and he's better at pretty much everything else than Paul Craig. That doesn't mean Paul Craig can't catch a Hail Mary submission like he has done in, you know, a lot of his fights, but is very unlikely. So if this fight stays standing, we know that Paul Craig's quite bad defensively, doesn't like to engage. Borralho's actually got a big advantage on the feet. He moves better, he hits harder, throws a higher volume, he's more technical, he's better defensively. In actual fact, even though Borralho's quite a decent level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, I think striking is the area of the fight where Borralho has the biggest advantage. So if the fight stays standing, Paul Craig is in a lot of trouble. But both these guys like to grapple, so you'd expect this fight to go to the ground. Paul Craig has a tricky submission game, but he does tend to tire out pretty quickly if you make him grapple hard. He gives up position a lot. His takedown offense is bad, and he's very, very weak off his back. So if Borralho gets takedowns, gets into top position, gets on Paul Craig's back, should be able to control him quite easily, win pretty easily. Out of all the big favourites on this card, Borralho is the one I'm most confident in getting the job done. I'd be very, very surprised if Paul Craig were to win this, but unfortunately, Borralho's odds reflect that. You can't bet him. He's too big of a favourite. To bet any fighter in this odds range, it's just pointless in my opinion. The risk to reward ratio is very bad. So in terms of the over-under on this one, do you know what? The over-under is set at over 1.5 rounds. I actually lean more towards the under here, because we do see Paul Craig capitulate when put in bad positions. We do know Borralho is very aggressive. He can cause Craig big problems on the feet. He can cause Craig big problems on the ground. I'm not going to be betting the under, but with the odds being, you know, steep favourite odds on the over, I actually think the under is more likely on this occasion. I don't like it enough to bet it, but I do think the under is more likely. in terms of the prop bets on this fight, Borralho inside the distance is the most likely outcome. The odds are not great. Borralho to win in round 2 and Borralho to win in round 3. The odds are terrible, actually. Yeah, that'd be it for props. That'd be it. Those odds are pretty stingy. They're pretty tight. I don't like them very much. So, that'll be it for this fight. Hope you found this breakdown useful. If you did, please hit the like button below. Please subscribe if you haven't already. I would really appreciate it. Check out the links in the description below. The various services I offer on my website I think you'll like and get a lot of value out of. Like I say, if you watch every UFC event, we make a profit on 70% of them in live betting. So if you watch every UFC event, for me it's a no-brainer to give this a try. It's my bread and butter. It's what I do best. I think you're going to like it a lot. Thank you very much. I hope you crush it this weekend. I'm still not sure what to do about Steve Erceg. Let me know what you think. Hope you crush it. Hope you make loads of money. We'll be back next week for another breakdown video. Thank you very much. Take care, everyone. Love you all. See you next week. Nice one, guys. Bye.